Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of these weekly sessions. Today, we're doing a live Q&A with yours truly. We don't have a guest today, but this is a topic that you all have been asking about for a while, at least some of you. I know we probably have a decent number of instructional designers in the room, but there are a decent number of you who are still wondering, is instructional design right for me? You've probably done some Googling and saw the great work-life balance, the salary, all of that. But naturally, you want to consider your options and dive deeper to really get an idea of what a day is like in the life of an instructional designer. So we're going to be diving into that on this session, but I do want to get a feel for who is in the room with us. So I have a couple of polls prepared. So my questions for you are, one, are you currently an instructional designer? So we know how many people are here to help share perspective and how many of you are here just to get an idea about whether ID is a good fit. And then that's my next question. How sure are you that instructional design is right for you? Maybe you've been an instructional designer for years, but you're like, I don't know if this is right for me. But I imagine most of you who are IDs are pretty happy with your role. All right, so hopefully you all see that poll. I see most of you are responding to it. No surprise that almost 85% of us here are not currently instructional designers. Thank you to those of you who joined who already have a nice ID role. We will definitely be looking forward to your perspectives in the chat, because I'm just going to be sharing my perspective and what I've learned from talking to other instructional designers. But every role is different. And most of us, we're pretty sure that instructional design is a good fit, but we're not really sure. So since we are here live together, we do want to take advantage of this chat feature, right? So we have some great instructional designers here, and I will try my best to keep an eye on the chat. But what I kind of envisioned is I'll talk a little bit more about my instructional design journey, like how I got into this space, what my expectations were, and what wound up meeting or exceeding those expectations, and what wound up falling a little short. And I'm sure many of you will resonate with some of those things, and you can expand upon it in the chat. And after that, I was thinking maybe we would open it up to just questions and answers. So if anyone has any specific questions, or if anyone would, we could even have people hop up on stage and share their own experience if anyone is open to doing that. So let's dive into it. We have a nice turnout here, and again, I'll look forward to that chat. Also, I might be sipping on some coffee. This is coffee. I'm not having happy hour at 10 a.m. over here, so be forewarned. So let's dive into the story, okay? So I was a senior in college when I really found and dove into instructional design. So when I was an undergrad, I was studying like English literature. I was really into the writing side of things. I was also really into traveling. Like my second major was international affairs. So I think I was always trying to find a way to combine the two. And I also really liked teaching. So in my mind, like as I was constantly exploring, like what do I see myself actually doing as a career? It was always between either teaching, maybe teaching English abroad, teaching at a high school here in the States, or getting a PhD in English literature and then teaching at the college level. So that was always like kind of the goal. And I remember the very first time I had ever heard about instructional design is back when I was a sophomore. So I was at some kind of like scholarship ceremony or something for the College of Education, because I was doing like English education at the time. That was when I was like, I'm going to be a high school teacher, like 1,000%. And at this ceremony, an instructional designer came from like Coca-Cola. He was a graduate from like Florida State's instructional design program. And he was just talking about instructional design like it was the best thing ever. He was like super well-spoken, seemed really successful. So it was impressive. And he was talking about the job opportunities. And I remember in my head, I was like, dang, this sounds like a pretty niche, like pretty cool career. But, I'm destined to be a teacher. Like I'm going to be a teacher. So I kind of just forgot about that and let it drift into the background. And then fast forward to my senior year. At this time, I had already applied for like Teach for America, and I think I like didn't get accepted to that. I was like applying to teach at like high schools nearby or like local schools. I wanted to be an English teacher, and I was also pretty set on applying for like PhD programs, but I hadn't gotten there yet. And, paying my way through college, I was like, my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, she had like a part-time job for this company, and it was like really relaxed, like remote, like about 10 hours or so a week. And I was like, okay, this seems like a good college job to land. Let me try applying for this. And, I was, of course, doing other jobs, but this was just like some nice extra income. So I applied to be on their journalism team. I was looking forward to it. I did the interview and it went well. But at the end of the interview, this hiring manager was like, you seem like a great fit for the company, but we actually don't have room on our journalism team anymore. We do have room on our training team. Okay, so this is how we get back into instructional design. So I was like, okay, yeah, it sounds interesting. It's still remote, it's still 10 hours a week, pretty relaxed. But it's when I at some point within that first few weeks, I started thinking back about instructional design again. And I found my way back to like my university's landing page, and I was like, let me just read more about this. And they had like a presentation put together. I probably should have pulled that up, but it talks about like the career outlook and the salary expectations and the work-life balance and all of that. I was like, dang, this is sounding pretty appealing, because again, I was considering teaching, and I know teachers, and I see how like intense it is and like draining and frustrating and all of the above. And then and I see the pay that comes with teaching. And then I was also looking at grad school, 7 years doing an English PhD. You get like a 20K a year stipend and like work your butt off, like who knows how many hours a week, to maybe get a professor job, but like probably not, because it's like winning the lottery. So that's where I was at. So then when you stumble across instructional design and you're like, wait a minute, I can work a normal work week. I can make really decent money, and I can possibly do that remotely. Like, that was seeming very, very appealing to me, because like I said, I mean, I really liked traveling. So this job, like the part-time job, wasn't anything special. I was putting together training in like Google Slides. So like nothing interactive, nothing with like the industry standard tools. It was basically working with existing content and subject matter experts to make Google slide presentations. But I did want to have fun with it. I bought some instructional design books because I did want to see, like, can I actually enjoy this? Is instructional design right for me? Is this something I can do instead of teaching? That's what I was trying to find out. So I read, I think, like Design for How People Learn, or I think that's the name of it, by Julie Dirksen, and it had some really actionable, like straightforward tips and advice. So I started implementing that in this like company training. I was trying to introduce like scenario-based learning and just using like avatars and trying to do some innovative things given the tools we had available. And I was promoted to like the team lead. It was still 10 hours a week, but I knew I was like, I could really leverage this experience down the line to like land a better role. So like it was essentially my foot in the door, which happened by chance. That's how a lot of people find their way into instructional design. Someone at their company needs someone to do a training role, or you fall into it. I know that's probably not the case with a lot of people here, but that is how a lot of instructional designers found their way into the field. And I'm just lucky because it happened pretty early. But yeah, so I was enjoying it. I was having a good time. The downside is that I was like reading some literature. Like we want to train people to do things better, to improve their performance. We want to actually make a difference instead of just like presenting information. And I remember talking about this at that company, like about my vision. And long story short, the people who actually made that call were like, oh, no, we just view training as like a way to present information. So I was like, this isn't right for me. Like, I want to do something a bit more innovative than this. This doesn't align with like my philosophy here. And at the time, yeah, I was like really obsessed with like traveling. So my vision was like, I want to just be able to travel the world, work from my laptop. And when I realized that instructional design and e-learning seemed like the best avenue to do that, I was kind of all in. Like, I was doing like an undergraduate thesis and all of this, like devoting most of my time to that. And then the last semester of my undergrad program, I like dropped my classes. I wanted to stop doing my thesis. I like enrolled in like master's level classes because I just wanted to get into this field like as soon as possible and like build a business and all of that. That didn't happen because my my thesis advisor was like, Devlin, you've done all this work. You can't just drop your thesis. So I finished it begrudgingly, but I think I'm glad I did it. Well, yeah, so I started my master's degree like a week after undergrad. And kind of the vision going in was, it seems like the perfect combo of writing, which I love to do since I will need to write content for these learning experiences. Technology, I'd been kind of obsessed with the computer since like I was a kid and like gaming and just like troubleshooting and network security things, just like a total tech nerd, I would say. And the education piece, like I really loved that. I was doing like teaching some like lower level college classes when I was a senior. And I think I got my first taste of like what teaching would actually be like when you know, at least a handful of students are just like on their computers, like not even looking up or like listening to what you're saying. So I had this very idealized version of teaching. I'm like, I just want to teach like 20 of me who are like super interested in English lit and will be like basically high level grad students, like obsessed with the content. That's not the reality, obviously. So I think I really dodged a bullet for myself not going into teaching. So it was good. It was good. As soon as I started my master's program, like we started getting some clients, and it was scary because I didn't have any visual design skills. I didn't know how to make things look nice. I was literally at square zero with that. I remember my first e-learning project and just like, oh, I'll just like put a person here, like throw out some speech bubbles. It was not attractive. But my first, you know, after a few weeks of being in my grad program, I kind of got lucky on Upwork. I was like, oh yeah, I designed training for like a tech company in California. You know, I have experience doing this. I want to make it happen. So I got a very small project on Upwork, but it was like starting from scratch. Like I had to actually design e-learning based on this topic, and I had never really done that before. I played around with it for an undergrad class I was teaching just to learn the tool, but I remember being like really nervous and really happy. I was like looking up e-learning examples, and I went up just like modeling like a nice title screen that I found, and I made it work. The client was happy, and that was the start of my portfolio. So sorry, I know we don't need like my life story here. So, and I see we have some good stuff going on in the chat, but it was off to a good start, right? It was like nerve-wracking, but it was also cool, like using my writing skills. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like there was some creativity involved, and that was scary for me, but also kind of cool because you're starting from square zero in some cases, and you need to create a product that like the client loves and that hopefully the end audience will love as well. So I was pretty optimistic, and I guess this is where it may help to set some expectations. Like, is this really right for you? I was thinking, perhaps naively, but I was like, instructional design and e-learning, it seems like I'll be able to have a much larger impact because instead of teaching to a classroom of 20 students 8 times a day, you design an e-learning experience once, it goes up on a learning management system, and it can go out to 50,000 people or 100,000 people every year for the next decade or so, with maybe some minor updates. So that also is like how I guess I romanticized instructional design, and like I thought that I would be able to find purpose that way, because obviously that's a big part of what was driving me to teaching. Like I not only did I love the content, but like it was very rewarding, and I've done a lot of tutoring and one-on-one stuff in undergrad, and like that was, those experiences are what made me fall in love with teaching. I'm like, I feel like I'm actually making a difference here. Like it just made me happy. So I thought I would have that same kind of experience in instructional design. So over a year, I continued landing clients through my master's program. And then by the time I graduated, we landed like some bigger projects, and it was just, running my business from the start and working on all different projects, government projects, corporate projects, healthcare projects. And it was great. Like my whole goal was to freelance. Like the last summer of my master's program, I took like one class. My wife, girlfriend at the time, we stayed in Berlin for a couple of months, like backpacked like around Italy and like through Europe. And I was working from my laptop the whole time doing client work. And it was like exactly what I had imagined. I was like, this is awesome. Like the business worked out. it's not fun waking up in Berlin and like, oh, we got to get to client work for like 6 hours today. But it was really cool just having that like location independence. So we landed a big client there. We got back, and then like kind of the grind began. Like the first year of freelancing, probably different than the first year of working a full-time job, just because not only are you like using like your craft and your skills and figuring out how to like, meet and exceed expectations for your client, but then it's also managing a business and making sure you don't get taken advantage of with contracts, and know how to look out for red flags and invoicing and taxes and, setting up your LLC. There's just a whole lot more that goes into that. I imagine most of us here are looking for full-time roles instead of freelancing, but we can talk about that later if you want to. But where I guess reality started to set in, like the tech side was great, the writing side was great, the education side was nice because that was the purpose for which we were doing these things, right? To help people learn, to help people do their jobs better. But the reality of corporate learning, and this is where we'd love to see some perspective of other instructional designers here, like it didn't really feel like I was having an impact. So we were working on some great projects, some high value projects. Like the money was beyond what I could have expected out of a master's program, just because there's so much opportunity in this space, so many ways, so many opportunities to like specialize and differentiate yourself. So that was really good. But the thing is a lot of the projects I was working on, the pay was great. The work-life balance is pretty good. As a freelancer, you have to set boundaries. Like I'm not working after 5 or it's going to be like double the price basically. But the finding the meaning, that is the part that I was really struggling with. And I imagine most instructional designers have some trouble with, because a lot of the corporate learning projects out there are to check a box essentially, or someone who may not know very much about learning and development or training or performance improvement. They may say, we need a course on effective communication, or we need a course on literally fill in the blank. But a lot of the times that thought is based on like a misconception, or, oh, the example. And one of my professors told me this example, Dr. Klein at FSU, great professor, learned so much from him. And I include a lot of what I learned in his classes, like in my YouTube channel. But he gave a really good example. I don't think he like came up with this. I think he found it somewhere else, but story time. So it's like this airline CEO, and this is just to show the importance of like a needs assessment and doing some analysis instead of just diving in and creating training. But this CEO of an airline, he decides to go undercover one day, and he's like, I'm going to ride my plane, and we're going to see how the staff do, right? Like I want to see how our people are treating our guests. So the flight attendant comes by and asks this CEO what they're drinking, and they're like, oh, get me some champagne, please. So the flight attendant brings by champagne in just a plastic cup, and the CEO in their head are like, what is going on? Like, we should have this in like a champagne flute. Like, this is not the attention to detail that we expect of our flight attendants. So let's go to our head of learning and development and tell them, we need training on this. We need to train our employees on which cups to use with which drinks. So they invest millions of dollars. They create some really slick training videos. They take all of these flight attendants into the office or off the plane for like an hour or so to go through this learning experience. We're feeling good. We spent millions, but it's worth it because that attention to detail will be nice. So the CEO, next day, whatever it is, next week, they're like, okay, everyone should be trained. Let's take another flight and let's see how we're doing here. So they hop on the flight, they order champagne, and sure enough, it comes back in a plastic cup, not a champagne flute. So the CEO is like furious, and they're like, what is going on here? Like, why did you not serve me this in a champagne flute? This is champagne. And the flight attendant is like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, we don't have champagne flutes. Like, these plastic cups are all we have. So that kind of sums up a lot of corporate learning in a nutshell, where any kind of problem, if we notice a problem, we're like, oh, let's throw training at it. That'll solve the problem. We need an hour-long course on this, an information-based course. Find someone who can build it. That will like solve our problem. But obviously, if we don't do actual analysis and explore the problem and think, why actually is this happening? Is it because there's a problem with the software? Is it because people, yeah, it can be environmental problems. What we're really looking for is skill and knowledge problems. And the thing too with corporate learning is a 99% of like the training we're creating is like info dump training. So it's like the school model. So it's like present a bunch of information related to a topic and then quiz people based on that information to see if they can remember it. So a big shift, and a shift that a lot of great instructional designers are helping contribute to, is instead of focusing on what people need to know just for like the sake of knowing it, is instead of focusing on what people need to do and how we can enable them to do those things more efficiently and more effectively. So I guess why I bring all of this up is because a lot of the training, like almost all of the training projects I was working on, I was like a hired gun, like coming in to actually build the thing. A lot of those training, like as I'm building it, I'm like, this isn't gonna help anyone. Like, why are we investing? Some of these companies are investing like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into these training projects I'm working on, and it's like, it was just really unsettling for me. I'm like, this is like a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it feels like we're not having an actual impact. We're just checking a box. They'll force all of their employees to go through this learning experience, and then we'll say, okay, everyone can communicate effectively because they took this hour-long course on it. And that's where I was feeling very, not very happy with instructional design. And like 2 years in, I'm like, I really don't know if this is like a long-term solution for me. I was looking at like going back to school and getting a PhD and trying to teach instructional design. I was like, should I kind of pursue like front-end web development or something? I really love the technical side of things. So curious to see what perspectives are coming up in the chat about that. But I would say that has been at the time, was the biggest letdown with the instructional design field. I love the creativity. I struggle with the visual design side of things, but I've been steadily improving for years. And it's, once you apply these basic principles, like anyone can learn it. Trust me, if I can learn it, you can learn it. I love like the variety of what you do day in and day out, because instructional design is such an interdisciplinary field. My background was in writing and like, one-on-one kind of coaching education. But basically writing was like my strongest skill set. And I came in and I was able to immediately put that skill to use. If you're coming into this field with a very strong like art and design background, you'll immediately be able to apply that skill and create beautiful user interfaces for e-learning. If you are, very skilled in programming, you'll come in, you'll be able to pick up a development tool and it will be a piece of cake. You can use your JavaScript skills to push authoring tools further. So I've used such a wide array of skills. Yeah. So that's where we were at. I was really happy with some parts of the field. I wasn't feeling satisfied though. That's the problem. I wasn't feeling like the work I was doing was having a difference beyond my immediate clients' lives, right? Like the clients are happy. And that is a big problem we face in this field. Like a lot of us are designing to make our clients happy or our managers happy, but we're not really designing to give the end audience, the people actually doing the work, what they need. And the time I thought that was a knowledge or skill problem on the part of instructional designers, but it's also a very big cultural problem. I know we have a lot of people coming from education, but and I'm sure you can relate to those kind of problems. It's like you want to do your job, but there are so many other factors like institutional and cultural factors that just kind of stop you from being as effective as you can be. And that same kind of thing is very prevalent in the instructional design world. You might know full well how to design a really helpful intervention. Maybe it's a learning tool, a job aid. Maybe it's just doing analysis to see, do we even have a problem here where people need training? Like you might know how to do all of those things, but when the person in power is saying, we need an hour-long course on communication, you can get better at having that conversation and trying to redirect that conversation. But it's an uphill battle sometimes, and we're kind of changing in baby steps. And there are some teams, I don't want to paint a really grim picture. There are some teams that are doing really good work, and there are ways to find meaning despite these things being true. Like my approach I've used with clients, I was able to shift it to a much more performance-oriented approach to where now I feel like, okay, at least the people going through this experience are going to practice using these skills instead of having to sit through and like regurgitate information. And the big breakthrough for me on the meaning front, like finding purpose and meaning, is when I started creating content for other instructional designers to help them move forward in the field. And that obviously had a direct impact on my business. I didn't know it at the time. But after being in this field even a year, I was helping my friends and just people from like Reddit who wanted to become instructional designers. I was hopping on calls and basically coaching people into the field just because I was so grateful for this field. It surpassed my expectations. Satisfaction. I was satisfied with the opportunities it gave me at the age I was at. I didn't think that was possible. I thought I'd be working, making $40K a year as a teacher or $20K a year as a grad student. So everyone who showed any kind of interest in instructional design, I was like, oh yeah, let me show you exactly what I did. Let me help you with your portfolio. Let's do all of that, because this is a great field that not really anyone knows about, especially back in 2017, 2018. But yeah, when I started creating content for people at a larger scale and started getting messages like, oh, this article really helped me, like, oh, I was able to land a job doubling my salary, that's when it kind of changed for me. And I was like, okay, creating content for instructional designers is way more rewarding for me than client work. And again, if that is important to you, that would be my biggest warning. Like if that job satisfaction and feeling like your work is really making a big difference in people's lives, you will have to be pickier about the companies you work for or the teams you join, because a lot of the jobs out there right now, you will be kind of churning out courses. And some people are perfectly happy with that, especially if you need a reprieve from like a very stressful career that you're coming from. You're probably working 40 hours or less per week. You'll be making a decent salary, like between 60, I guess starting like low end seems to be like 60 grand a year, but a lot of people with good portfolios are landing roles making like 80 to 100K a year out of their previous careers, like right out the gate. So really good financial opportunities. The work itself isn't super like difficult most of the time. Like some things will be difficult for you, like visual design, difficult for me. Writing storyboards, I love writing and I'm a pretty proficient writer, but doing that day in and day out, especially doing it for projects where I didn't feel like would make a difference, that was very draining for me. Like working on storyboards where I guess this brings us to another topic. Like you'll get a lot of feedback as an instructional designer, and you need to be good at taking feedback. So I would write these scripts or develop this e-learning, and sometimes you'll be getting feedback from people who didn't do a master's degree or don't know about instructional design or e-learning. And they'll give you feedback telling you, we need to do this because this will be better for the learner, or this will be better for engagement. But they're really just saying like, I will like this better. So depending on like how much influence you have at an org, in the beginning, you might just have to take that and be like, okay, we'll do this, even though I know from research, it's not best practice. Or you might bring up the research and the best practice and they'll just be like, yeah, but like this will just be better. And it's like, okay. So, and then but yeah, just like most creative professions, it's just like, you really can't have too much of a personal attachment to your own work, because it will get torn apart either by people who are skilled and will help make it better, but also people who may be giving you feedback that will make it worse for your learners, for you. And it's like, you can fight that battle and try to take a stand and advocate for your learner. And that's what we need to do collectively as a field. But sometimes just like the cultural influences and all of that, it's like, you really have to decide, like, is this the fight I want to pick? Is this battle worth it? And again, I don't want to scare people off, but this is just like the reality for a lot of roles and people out here. So yeah, some of the benefits, maybe this is a negative thing, but for a lot of us, like every day is different. My role now is a little different. I stopped taking on client work a few months ago, and I'm focusing like solely on the content business, these webinars, YouTube channel, my bootcamp, my website. But I was in it for years. And I talk to people every day who are in full-time roles, freelancing roles. And a lot of us, every day is different. Some days we're in meetings with subject matter experts from around the world working in an industry who maybe we had never even heard of before. Another day we might be in a tool like Adobe XD designing visual mockups and making things look nice and bringing together layouts. The next theory might be in storyline, doing like logic driven programming, right? Like adding triggers and conditions and variables and like making the thing work after you know how it's going to look. We might be writing, like storytelling, creative writing, writing realistic characters and dialogue, world building for like an e-learning simulation. So it's so varied, and that's, I think, one of my favorite parts about the field. And just like, it's a good thing and a bad thing. I think it's good because you just get so much variety. And if you're bored, you know, I'm sick of writing. Okay, let's dive deeper into visual design or development or something like that. The downside is like, you have to, there will be some degree of like spreading yourself thin. You know, like if you're just like, oh, I'm a writer, all I do is storyboards, you can do all of your professional development on storytelling and writing more concisely and grammar and just become like a master writer. But for me, like, motion graphics is so cool, and like animations, like custom animation with like After Effects. But I'm also really interested in programming and like JavaScript and React and learning backend programming and storytelling. I want to dive deeper into that. But like, there's only so much time in a day for your professional development. So it's hard. Like, yeah, I want to devote 2 months to learning motion graphics, but like, I also want to devote that time to learning programming. So it's kind of hard. You really do have to make choices and prioritize, because it's just such an interdisciplinary field that you're never going to master it all. So in the beginning, it's a really good idea to experiment with all of the things and find out, like, where do you get into your best like flow state? Like, what do you really enjoy the most? What is the market, what is the market responding to the most if you're a freelancer or self-employed? But yeah, I think that's most of the stuff I wanted to get to. Hopefully this gets the conversation going. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat now. If anyone wants me to dive deeper into anything I mentioned, just let me know. But I think we can just open this up for a Q&A now. And if anyone else wants to share any perspective on any of the things I mentioned, maybe you have a different experience than me, or yeah, we can just open up the conversation. We have another 25 minutes or so to hang out here. All right. We have a question from Carmen Sita about how to become technically savvy. Learning the theory of instructional design is time consuming. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. So especially when you do commit, you're like, okay, instructional design is right for me. How do I actually become an instructional designer? It's not just like, oh, where do I want to devote my professional development efforts? It's like, what do I need to get a job, right? So the theory piece, right? We need to know how to talk about instructional design. The big thing with that is like, knowing where instructional design ideally fits into the equation, right? Instructional designers solve a very specific problem. Like, we help bridge gaps in knowledge and skill. Okay, now there's more to it than that. Like, we need to do some analysis. Like, is this problem even caused by a gap in knowledge or skill? But ideally, after we make that determination, an instructional designer can design like a learning intervention. People are here. We need them to be here, with what they know and what they can do. So instructional designers think, okay, what's the best and most efficient way to bring people from point A to point B? And obviously there are many different strategies and approaches to doing that. So, my YouTube channel, I have like a whole like becoming an instructional designer playlist that covers like the theories that you'll hear about the most in instructional design, or at least like the models, the names, the approaches to evaluation, to designing lessons, to creating training. As far as the technically savvy piece, like, I suggest just getting in the tools and trying to build with them. So Storyline is like hands down like the most in-demand tool that instructional designers use right now. So let's articulate Storyline. But also it's good to know like the Adobe suite will always help you. Adobe Illustrator I use the most because I work a lot with like illustrated graphics, but Photoshop is another good one to know if you prefer, or if you imagine yourself designing more like photorealistic learning experiences. And then just like a video editor, like a lot of instructional designers do multimedia editing and work with media. So a tool like Camtasia or Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro, they're all very similar, right? Just like these timeline-based video editors, but some IDs spend a lot of time doing that. All right. User experience, I see there's some chat about UX in the chat. Those skills complement an instructional designer skill set very well. The better you understand your audience and you know what their struggles are, what their desires are, what their preferences are, like the more you know your people, the better you're going to be able to design solutions for them. And that's something where, like in a master's program, it's driven home so much. Here are the different types of analysis. Here's how to conduct them. These are the only cases in which you should design training. So when you're going through your master's program, like I'm like, oh, I can't wait to do some needs assessments and get out there and like really help solve some problems for these organizations. Like it seems so valuable to use this approach in the right way. And then you get out there and it's like, we need a course on this here for this price. Can you do it? And it's like, okay, this isn't quite all I expected it to be. But good stuff. Paula has a question about opportunities for bilingual IDs. I've seen that question come up every now and then. And I do see opportunities come up every now and then. Like I've had people reach out to me like, do you know any IDs who also speak French? And I connected someone with an opportunity there. And I've seen a couple of times for Spanish. I've seen it for like Mandarin. So there aren't like endless opportunities, but they're definitely out there. And maybe if people can share more insight on that, we would be happy to see it. Emily asked what React is. React is a front-end JavaScript library that lets you create like user interfaces pretty quickly just using pure JavaScript. So it lets you build like really high-performing modern web applications. And it's what a lot of like the most popular websites are built with. Like I think Facebook kind of created React. It's an open source library, but like probably most of the Facebook user interface is built with React and many other household companies. I see we have some people interested in learning programming. So that's where I kind of specialize, is in like the development side of things. So like half of my projects were where I do the instructional design and the development. And then half of my projects were like pure development projects. So instructional designers would send me a storyboard, or they would even send me a finished course, and I would have to add like some JavaScript and some XAPI tracking to like pull more data out of the course. So that's where my specialization was with a lot of my client projects. But I love doing the instructional design for projects that will have a real impact. So good to see that people are interested in that. I think I saw a question earlier too, like, do you need to know programming to become an instructional designer? Not at all. Knowing some programming might help you, just because when you're using like Storyline, you can do it in more advanced things if you know how to work with logic. Like if you know how to work with variables and conditions, which is really what like programming is at its core, right? Like do this if this, do this other thing if this other thing. So knowing how to work with logic like that will help you in Storyline. But as far as like using JavaScript, really not necessary for 99.9% of roles. But knowing it obviously is a way to differentiate yourself. Some of my most profitable freelance projects were using JavaScript, just because not many e-learning developers know how to use it. So when you have a skill like that there isn't much competition, and if you can be found by people who need that service, you can charge really premium rates or land really specialized niche roles. Josh asked, with so many tools out there, how do you choose which one to focus on? So we've done surveys, Josh, where we ask, what are the 3 tools that instructional designers should be familiar with upon hire? And Articulate Storyline was selected by like 80-something% of all of the hiring managers who completed this. And Adobe Captivate is like a competitor, and they were like 20%, 20-something%. And then the second most common tool was like Microsoft PowerPoint at like 44%. And Articulate Storyline was like 80-something%. So that tool, at least right now, is like reigning supreme as far as an e-learning authoring tool. Now, there's more to instructional design than just using the tool, but that if you want to see the best, most like surefire return on investment for your time learning a tool, Storyline is a very safe one to go with. All right, still scrolling through the chat looking for questions. So Tony's asking about positions where you're a member of an instructional design team and it's more collaborative. I think you will not have much trouble finding a role like that, Tony. Like, as a freelancer, I'm kind of just like hopping into teams as I see fit. And I love that. Like some of my, people have subject matter expert horror stories, but that's honestly one of my favorite parts of doing instructional design work, is working with the subject matter expert, especially when we can use like the action mapping process. Some of you may not be familiar with that. I have YouTubes about that on I have videos about that on YouTube. But it's really fun when you're working with a subject matter expert and you're really trying to dig down to what people need to do to accomplish this goal we've identified. And then you're kind of creating this like scenario based, story driven, like e-learning simulation like before their eyes. It's really fun because the subject matter experts sometimes get really excited about the work you're doing, and they're like, this is like the most fun meeting I've had in a while, because you're kind of doing like world building and stuff with them. And that's not everyone's experience, right? Like, I also kind of specialized in the ID work I was doing, where it was this story driven, scenario based experiences. Whereas if you're working on like a really dry topic and you're like, make an hour long course on like how this really complex like engineering topic works, and your subject matter expert is just like sending you like 30-page technical documents, maybe that will be a different experience. But back to your question about it being collaborative, there are a lot of teams that do work collaboratively. And there are some teams too, I should mention, where they are specialized, right? So they'll have one person who is doing the working with the subject matter experts and writing the storyboard. They'll have another person who does the graphic design, another person who does the e-learning development, and that is all you're doing all day, is just doing the development or doing the writing and working with the subject matter experts. So if you know, when I've been talking about all of this, if you're like, I would love to do the writing, but I don't want to have anything to do with the technology, it will be harder to get your foot in the door and to find a nice role. But if you build a portfolio that shows off like some really nice storyboards and like, here's what I was working with, this like complex information, and I turned it into this really like easy to consume storyboard that would be ready to hand off to a developer, having a specialized portfolio like that will really help you land those specialized roles. So there are collaborative teams, and there are collaborative teams too where everyone owns a project. But if you're like, oh yeah, I'm like struggling with this technical concept, let me ask my coworker who's like great with JavaScript, and then they can kind of help you with that piece. And if you're really good with like the creative writing part, you might have your team members ask you for help with that on their projects. So I've talked to people in teams like that too. So if you're looking for collaboration, I don't think that should be too difficult to find. We have a question about how critical a degree is. Bachelor's degree is kind of the baseline for a lot of these ID roles, at least in the US and probably Western Europe. I'm sure there are IDs who don't have a bachelor's degree, so it's not impossible. It's just kind of a good baseline. And if you're referring to a master's degree in the corporate world, not really necessary. Could help you get a better lay of the land, but I try to, my YouTube channel I've created to kind of help with that. And I've included some of the biggest takeaways from my master's program in my YouTube videos. But if you are interested in like doing ID work for government or higher education, in some cases, a master's degree is kind of like required to get into the role. It's just like that box needs to be checked. So if you're in corporate, you don't really need a master's, and I have a YouTube video exploring it further on my channel. But if higher ed or government, probably safe to get a master's degree. Where are the most opportunities outside of corporate America? Dennis asks. That is a good question. I don't have like raw data on that, but it seems like there are just so many opportunities across the board. Like people I graduated with they're in higher ed, they're in government, they're doing like energy consulting, for like energy companies, healthcare companies, tech companies, like across the board right now, there's just so many opportunities for instructional designers. Jeremy's asking if I have any input on how instructional design in higher ed is different from corporate. So I haven't worked in a higher ed role, but I did a ton of research on this before, as I was making that decision for myself. And I've talked to many people who have done both. And higher ed, I think it's a little more like chill. Like in a corporate, a lot of it is like a very high, like fast paced, like production environment. Like we need to be churning these things out. Again, this is the average company. This isn't every corporate learning team. And in higher ed, I feel I hear that there's not much time spent in the authoring tools. So like storyline and doing like, really nice visual design work. I don't think that will be a very big part of your role as a higher ed ID, but I hear it's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of working with professors and trying to bring their courses, either bring them from face-to-face to an online like LMS-based course. So built in like Canvas, for example, or or updating an existing professor's course. And the frustration I hear with this is that a lot of the time you're in kind of like a support role in the higher ed space. So like you're trying to help the professors, they're like calling you with like LMS problems, but then also you're trying to help these professors improve their online course offerings, and the professors are like, I have a PhD, I'm a professor, like I don't really want to take this advice, like I know best. So those are the frustrations I've heard in the higher ed front. You know, a lot of meetings that may not be necessary, and you're trying to help professors who may not really want your help or don't value your expertise. Just to give a flip side of that, one of my professors, before I was like pursuing ID, they were talking about how great the ID was who helped them. They're like, oh yeah, they helped me so much with my my online course. It's like going so well. Like I couldn't have done it without them. So I know some professors, like I'm sure really do appreciate the help, but yeah, that's my perspective on that. Deirdre is asking for our number one book recommendation. Maybe some of you shared that in the chat, but Map It by Kathy Moore. You've heard me mention action mapping. That kind of changed at that time when I was feeling really like frustrated with instructional design, and I was like, I feel like these projects aren't really helping people. I read Map It, and it was like, yes, like I'm not the only one who's been going through this. And Kathy Moore actually gives you like an actionable plan to kind of move back in the right direction. So it's so engaging, and it's like really funny. We've done question and answer sessions with Kathy Moore too. So maybe if you want an intro before buying the book, check out, I think it's called like Action Mapping Q&A with Kathy Moore, and we have that on YouTube. So check that out like after this, or if you want to learn more about the action mapping stuff, definitely refreshing. That's my number one instructional design book recommendation. Dimas is asking if it's possible for someone outside of the US to land a remote ID job, and you're from Indonesia. I'm really not sure. I would say for W-2, like full-time salaried ID jobs, probably not. I do think those always come with the caveat, like you need to be in the US. But when it comes to freelance, like 1099 work, I don't see why that wouldn't be possible. If you have a nice portfolio and if you can make the right connections or be found by the people in the US with the budgets, by these clients, I don't think, some of them are like contract roles. We're like, oh, we need someone working like 30 hours a week for like a year, and they kind of try to treat you like an employee. Those ones usually want you to be in the US or require that you're in the US. But like for freelance work, like I've worked with people all over the world outsourcing some of my like development tasks when I'm really busy with content. So freelance, on the freelance front, you can definitely land work with US companies, but on the full-time front, I think that might be much more difficult. But if anyone else has any perspectives on that, feel free to share it. And I see I'm like scrolling through the chat, and I see the scroll bar is just like moving further and further up. So I'm sorry I'm not seeing like the recent questions or comments, but we do have another 10 minutes. Maybe I could hang out a bit longer too if we still have most of us here and we have more time. All right. So Daryl is asking if I think having a master's degree in instructional design is better than having a grad certificate. You're in a flexible grad program that lets you choose either one. So a certificate. So what real value does a certificate hold? I guess it's a resume item. It can look good on a resume. And it can give you like a lay of the land. It can give you a good introduction to the field, so you know how to talk about it. The basic skills. But at the end of the day, like I think the appeal of a master's degree is, well, I guess one of the appeals is just like build your own confidence. Like some people, they question their own expertise when they don't have that degree to back them up, and I think that's a very real concern. But I think the real like ROI on a master's degree would be if you're trying to get a role that requires a master's degree. So like we were saying, like higher ed, if you want to work for a university or if you want to work for like certain government departments, a certificate isn't going to be enough for those kind of roles. So if you're interested in that, I would go master's. But if you want to work in the corporate space, I don't think you need to spend an extra year in school or anything like that just to get the degree. And I'm sure you're taking the most important classes for the certificate program anyway. So yeah, because there's so much you can learn just online for free from people who are actually doing this thing, like YouTube channels and blog posts and LinkedIn and live events. And a lot of the times professors, at least most of the professors in my program had been professors since they were in school. You know, they graduate in undergrad, they go into a PhD program, they finish that, and now they're a professor. A couple of professors had been like veteran industry practitioners, and like those are the classes where you really learn something. So I guess it's just how you're feeling about the value you're getting out of your classes. Robert's asking, is there a good place to post practice storyline projects for critique? I'm not sure if what I've done is portfolio worthy. So Robert, we have a Slack community where you are always welcome to share work for feedback there. We have like a help feedback channel, and people share projects there all the time. So I'll share a call to action for that if anyone would like to join the Slack. But another really good place, and people may have already mentioned this in the chat, is the Articulate eLearning Heroes challenges. So every week, the people at Articulate, they post a challenge, something that you should try to create in Articulate storyline usually. So it'll be like create a project using only shades of black and white, or create an interactive like infographic in storyline. And so many people from the community, they respond to that challenge, they post their work. You know, you can, when you share your project, you can say any feedback is appreciated, and you'll get feedback from people who have been doing this for 8 years, and maybe even just, you know, encouragement too from the community that this looks great. Oh, I just started and this is really inspiring. So that's a nice community too if you want to practice storyline projects specifically. So check that out. Just look up like storyline ELH challenges, and you'll find like hundreds of them. And yeah, that's a very active community. So Haley mentioned the frustrations or feelings about not doing relevant or meaningful work, and you think it would bother you in the ID profession. So I have suggestions for ID roles or paths that could combat that. So again, I can only speak from my perspective here. Like my way to combat that was creating content for people, and I imagine if I was working full time at a company, I would be able to find a lot of meaning out of helping like my teammates or my coworkers like learn new skills. And if they were struggling, I'd be able to help them. I wonder if it would be more meaningful working for like a nonprofit. Oh, what? Okay, one way, and I don't know if this is verified, but I've thought about this a lot. So most instructional designers are doing work for internal employees, right? The idea is to help our employees perform better. But if I had to work a full-time job, I think where I would really be happy is in a customer education role. So where, you know, like when you go to a company's website and you want to learn how to use their product, or you want, yeah, I mean, that's basically what it is. You're learning how to use a product, or maybe even content marketing for a company where, well, that's getting off track. It wouldn't be an instructional designer doing that. But like Melissa Milloway, for example, like she used to work at Amazon doing like internal training, and now she works at Miro, and she does customer education. So it's cool because it's like you're doing public facing stuff, and the people who are coming there because they want to learn how to use the product. So if you can design some really efficient learning materials, your whole goal is to like keep those people engaged, give them a positive impression of the brand, and help bridge those knowledge and skill gaps really efficiency so they can use your product, love your product, and I guess the business case is continue paying for that product. So I would really like that piece, just because it doesn't feel good designing training that you're just like forcing people to take, and you know they're just going to be like clicking next, like trying to get through that thing as fast as possible, not having a good time. And there are other ways too, like if you are in a corporate like employee training kind of role, action mapping is a great way to move in the right direction and design things that are actually meaningful and helpful for people. So it's definitely possible to combat it. It's just like be aware that this is a problem that our field faces, right? See, scrolling through the comments, I think I'm like 100 messages behind. So hang in there with me. Just scrolling through the chat. Good discussions here. Oh yeah, I see Ken made that recommendation. Julie Dirkson's Design for How People Learn. That's the first instructional design book I read. If you're, you know, my number one recommendation is Map It, but if you're looking for like, I want to get my feet wet into this, I want to learn what this is all about, that book right there, Design for How People Learn, a great place to start. Oh, Taylor, I see you mentioned eLearning Heroes for the feedback. Good stuff. And then I think this is where the discussion is starting about all of these responses I've had. So I think I might just scroll down to the bottom. Or actually, this looks like a pretty good question from Bradley. How do you know when to advocate when it comes to your own expertise, what best fits the client's need, or just simply do what the client is requesting you to do? So that's the big challenge, right? Like that's what the struggle is. It's like what I was talking about earlier. It's like, is this battle, is this the hill I die on? Sometimes is what it comes down to. And when I was in those situations specifically, so when I was like out of my master's program, I was working with teams, and it's like the research isn't important, the best practices aren't important. What's important in this like culture that I got involved in is what the manager says. So if the manager says it's engaging for the learners, it's engaging for the learners. And that's not what I expected, right? I expected going into this, like, my expertise would be respected, like I have a master's degree, I have a solid portfolio. But sometimes, like, you're just gonna know, like, okay, this person really doesn't value what I'm saying. They view me as like a grunt worker who just like is an order taker and does what they say. And so there are so many things that go into like shifting that perspective of yourself. So what helped me move out of that was creating the content. And this is what I love, right? Like creating the content. It's what I fell in love with. It's how I found my meaning. And I get to use my instructional design skills. This is pretty informal, but social learning. But yeah, so when you're reaching out to clients, when you're like bidding yourselves on projects, I mean, there's a lot to it. Like sometimes there are red flags where you're like, okay, clearly because this person is telling me when I need to be, telling me to be in the office at certain times. Well, that doesn't apply so much to full-time roles. Like you're probably going to have to deal with that as a full-time employee. Maybe not so much now because there's so many remote opportunities, but Bradley, I feel like honestly we could do a whole session on that. I don't know how to tackle it right now because there's just so much nuance to it. It's like, how did the arrangement start? Because sometimes from day one, you're going to be viewed as an order taker and you're just going to be exhausting yourself trying to battle that. And then sometimes when the client does come to you and views your expertise, sometimes it's based on their misconceptions about good training. So if it's coming from like a power dynamic perspective and they're like, you're doing what I say basically, and because it's best because I say so, you're just going to exhaust yourself. If you're working with a client or a company like that or a team like that, I would just suggest trying to get off of that team. Like it's not going to be a good experience. But if you're working with a client or a team and they're just telling you to do something or telling you, oh, we should do this, it could be because they don't know any better, and it could be an education piece. So if you get the sense that they're asking you for that to do something because they think it's best and they might not know, that's where you can kind of come in as like a consultant and use a consultative approach and kind of position, here's an alternative, or what problem are we really trying to solve with this, and try to have that conversation that way. So hopefully that's enough to think about, but we could do a whole session on how to shift that conversation and shift that perception. All right, it looks like we are at the top of the hour. There's so many good questions, but let me just keep. I didn't expect there to be so many questions, and I don't think we can stay here for another hour. But we're gonna do sessions like this every single week. Yeah, so next week, oh, actually, yeah, this is a good time to mention next week's session. We are doing a session called Landing Your Dream Instructional Design Role, and this is with Ivan Mendoza. And a couple of years ago, he was working as a teacher. He just decided he wanted to get into instructional design, so he landed an ID role. And then after 1 year in that ID role, he landed his dream instructional design role at Apple. So really inspiring story. He has a lot of like really, really good information to share about resumes, about preparing for the job search, about interviewing, networking. I've been talking to him a bit, and he's gonna provide like so much value on this session. So if you're interested in either landing your first ID role or landing like your dream ID role at your dream company, Ivan has some really, really good tips for how to do that. So that's next week, same time, same place. I'm going to share a new invite link with my mailing list and on LinkedIn next week. So stay tuned for that. still scrolling down the chat. I don't want to miss anything, but like it's anxiety inducing seeing all of these messages and trying to keep up with them. But I think I should call it. I think I should call it because I'm not going to catch up to all of them. So I am sorry if I missed your question. You can find me in the Slack community. Yeah, if you have any questions that we didn't get to, but that you would really like answered either by me or from other instructional designers, we have like over 2,000 IDs in that Slack community. So please share your question in any of those public channels, or if it's more private, you can send it to me directly, and we'll make sure you get what you need and can decide if ID is really right for you. But thank you for all hanging out here with me and being so lively in the chat. It was a fun session. Hopefully my perspective helped you a bit decide if instructional design is a good fit for you. And I will see you all soon.